Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So today, inshallah, we're on our 4th lesson out of 11 lessons. Last year I did it in 12, but I think with the pace that we're going, we may be able to squeeze it into just 11 lessons, inshallah ta'ala. Whatever we don't finish in the month of Ramadan, we'll continue after Ramadan, inshallah. So last time we talked a lot about the similarities between the Christians and the Muslims, and we wanted to build a common base because this is kind of the way that you build rapport with the people you're talking to. You have to understand that some of the people have 5 to 10 to 15 years of social media propaganda telling them that you are a terrorist, you are the enemy, don't talk to these people, don't trust these people. And of course things have kind of changed a little bit with globalization and the fact that there's just so many Muslims in this area, which it's helping, and alhamdulillah it's going to help you in the dawah here, but in some parts of Canada even, you're going to notice a shift. Like for example, when I was visiting Montreal, I noticed that Islamophobia was much higher in that area compared to a place like London. In London, the population of Muslims right now is actually about 15%. So if you don't feel like you're so much out of place, it's a little bit of a numbers game sometimes. And that's why when you go to certain areas of town, especially if you're like in White Oaks Mall area, or if you're in the Northwest like here, or even if you go to Springbank Park in the summertime, you can see so many Muslims to the point that people are starting to get used to us. We still need to have a dialogue with them, but the comfort point is very important, that we build the rapport in the beginning. And so we wanted to focus a lot on showing the similarities between Christianity and Islam, because this will help them to realize that we are not really foreign to them. We are very much similar to them, except with a few small differences. Obviously, the true concept of Tawheed, which what we share with the Yahud, with the Jews, and with the Nasara, we share a lot of the akhlaq. And actually, subhanAllah, a lot of the ibadat that Isa alayhi salam actually practiced that Christians don't practice today. So in a lot of ways, nicely, respectfully, we would say, we're trying to follow Isa alayhi salam better than most Christians. We're not going to claim that we're better than everybody in the sense of individual acts of worship, but it seems that we're trying harder than most Christians of today in terms of following the text, in terms of following what was actually said and done by Isa alayhi salam. We also spoke about ad-din al-nasiha, which is to give advice, sincere advice, and we said that there's different types of nasiha, right? We said that nasiha to Allah's book is actually sincerity. It's one of the meanings of nasiha, and same thing to the Prophet ﷺ. But when it comes to the general Muslims and to the leaders, then it's also advice, right? And the many forms, like istishara, in terms of general consultation, and that's part of ad-din al-nasiha. We'll cover 4 more slides on that because this is still a type of da'wah where we advise other Muslims to become better Muslims. Alhamdulillah, our aqeedah is already sound. Obviously, there are some places in the world where you still see a lot of serious bid'ah. Like for example, one of my colleagues at work today at Al-Taqwa Islamic School actually comes in to substitute from time to time. He was just reminding me of some of the stuff that we see sometimes in the Middle East. So unfortunately, there's an area, I think he was saying, in Jordan, where they built like a shrine over a person's qabr, over their grave. They do tawaf 7 times around the grave. They attached a chain to a tree for some kind of barakah, and they were telling a woman who couldn't give birth to a child to jump over this chain 7 times. This is, of course, completely not from Islam. And this is the danger, obviously, of not studying the Quran with the Sunnah. There was another brother from Oman, and even though they speak very good Arabic there overall, they were trying to convince the people there that they'll never see Allah Azza wa Jal on the Day of Judgment. Even though there's so many evidences both from Quran and from Sunnah that we will definitely be able to see Allah Azza wa Jal. For example, the Sahih Hadith, that you'll be able to see Allah Azza wa Jal the way you see the full moon. And the reason why the moon and not the sun is because when you look at the sun, it hurts your eyes, right? And in our current forms, we cannot handle Allah Azza wa Jal. So those who misquote the ayat that talk about how Musa alayhi salam was told that Allah is going to reveal himself to the mountain and basically see what's going to happen next, and the mountain was obliterated. This is in this stage of the dunya. But in the next life, what the Prophet was trying to explain in hadith is that then we're going to be able to see him like we see the full moon. The moon doesn't burn our eyes because it's not the direct heat of the sun. So the same way how the moon does not harm us, then it will not harm us on the Day of Judgment to look at Allah Azza wa Jal, or when we truly see him in his full form in Jannah, inshallah ta'ala, because this will actually be the greatest gift that you ever get in paradise, which will be to see Allah Azza wa Jal without any form of veil or obscurity blocking the way, inshallah ta'ala. But anyways, so we're going to talk a little bit more about ad-din al-nasiha, just a few more slides on how to improve our basically giving advice to each other. And then the next thing we're going to look at is 10 major Islamic sciences or ulum ad-din on how we can be better du'at, how you can become a better da'i or da'iyah in the feminine form, or a better talib or taliba of ilm, of knowledge. So a da'wah carrier, obviously a person who calls to Islam, a talib al-ilm, a person who's a student of knowledge. So we'll look at some major resources to build your base in all of these 10 different types of Islamic sciences. Somebody might ask, why would we want to do that? Isn't this just a fiqh of dawah course? Don't we just want to learn some basic verses of the Bible and the Quran and Hadith so we can start calling people to Islam? Although that's the core of what this course is about, in real practice, when you're talking to people of different faiths, especially if they want to challenge you, if they want to oppose you, you're going to need to be well-rounded. Because if you're dealing, for example, with an Orientalist, these people, their job is to try to make Muslims doubt their own faith, and they're going to attack you on purpose to put doubts into your mind. And so people who are like, for example, anti-hadith or Quraniyun, which the Prophet ﷺ actually prophesies that these people would come in the future, they would believe in the Quran and they would say that that's it, that's enough for us, right? These people exist today. For example, at Isna Masjid, just a few years ago, one of them came to the mosque in Mississauga and was trying to convince all the Muslimin there they should reject hadith entirely. So when we want to look at the other sciences, we want to know things, for example, like what is the evidence from the Quran and from the Sunnah, why you even have to follow hadith? Or what are the major masdarat in terms of where we get our knowledge from? Like which websites are credible for Quran and for tafsir and for hadith and for fatawa, for Islamic rulings. We want to know these major resources. That way, if we get attacked from a different angle, especially if somebody is coming out to really challenge us rather than to listen, we're ready for that, right? And also, if somebody has very detailed questions, we can provide the references that they need, inshallah ta'ala. So that's why we're going to talk about that today in this fourth lesson, inshallah ta'ala. So, summarizing up with, I hope I'm going in the right direction. I don't actually have to go this way. So, one of the things in terms of nasiha is that we don't spy or pry on people's information. So what that means is basically, la tajassus. We're not supposed to dig in for more information from people that they're already trying to supply for us. So we live in a time now where people think that it's a source of entertainment to look for gossip for others. We go to the grocery store and we see celebrity so-and-so did something with so-and-so, right? There are people that try to make money out of ghiba and namima. Ghiba is obviously when it's true information, and then namima is when people are making stuff up about other people. So either way, in general, the general principle is a Muslim should never be going into this stuff. And if you see people encouraging others to do this as a form of entertainment, you should stop them, right? And the general rule even around ghiba and namima is if you don't want to be sinful, you actually have to tell them to stop. And if they don't stop, you have to leave that gathering so that you don't incur any of the sins. And one of the very challenging things about ghiba and namima is most of the scholars will tell you that if you actually want to be forgiven for this, you have to go to the person who it was done to and ask them to forgive you. And then some scholars say that obviously if the person passed away, they hope that maybe if you made sadaqah on their behalf or something like that, hopefully this will count. But ideally, the safest way is you ask that person for forgiveness. But what's even safer than that is what the doctors tell you when it comes to becoming sick in the first place. The best medicine is prevention. Avoid the situation altogether rather than get yourself in that mess. So we have a hadith here, and Ali ibn Hussein, قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن من حسن إسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعني. Which means that Ali ibn Hussein radiallahu anhu reported that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, verily among the excellence in Islam is for a man to leave what does not concern him. Because I work in an elementary school, it's so common for me to see, especially between grades, I would say 5 to 8, that these kids, subhanAllah, I don't know what it is with this generation. It's like because they don't want to be in school, they decided, khalas, after the winter holiday break, they just want to If they can get out of school, they'll do it. If they can get out of doing all their assignments or their work, they'll do it, right? But as long as they don't get too many consequences. But in the meantime, they want to look for something juicy. What's happening to so-and-so? Who's doing this? Who's doing what? Who likes this person? Who likes that person? And that goes against this principle of minding your own business, essentially, right? The only time you don't mind your own business is when you see public wrong going on around you and you want to fix it, right? This is different. But to go digging for something that's hidden and trying to expose it in front of everybody, this is not Islamic. Unfortunately, in a TikTok society, this is, sorry, I said that right? TikTok, right? I was about to say toxic. But anyways, in this TikTok society that we live in, everybody wants to broadcast everybody's life and their own life. This is actually not really a good idea from the Islamic perspective. It's actually much more dignified if you keep a lot of your personal information to yourself. The more you say about yourself, the more open you are as a target from anybody to basically dissect you and try to do damage to you. Here. Yeah. This is an exception for sure. So the thing here is that there's two types of, I guess you could say, munkar. There's the type where nobody knows about it, and in this case, if you could advise this person privately, that would be the best thing. But if this person has already gone public, and let's say especially if they're a public figure, then at this point, almost every scholar on the face of the earth is going to say, if it's better for you to warn other people about this public figure to prevent the greater harm that they're going to do, then in this case, by all means, you can prevent it, and it won't even be considered a ghiba. If they're like a public figure, they're a leader, they're a politician, they are a very popular person on social media, and it's dangerous for other people to listen to them, then you have every right to warn other people about it, and inshallah, there's no sin on you for that. So for example, let's say somebody committed zina, right? The Prophet ﷺ, he gave a woman multiple opportunities to just go away basically and make tawbah. But because she insisted that she wanted the punishment done to her, then it was done for her in this dunya. And then one of the Sahaba, they spat on this woman's body after she was stoned. And the Prophet ﷺ explained to her that her tawbah was enough to basically eradicate the sins for a great number of you. I don't remember if there was a specific number mentioned, but the idea here is that in a lot of cases, if there's a way to kind of cover up the mistake, sometimes it can't be helped. So for example, in the case of murder, usually this is one of the situations where like there's somebody who has been murdered, right? So at minimum, normally there's the diya if it's an accidental murder where you have to give blood money, which is basically a huge sum of money to basically make up or to atone for the accidental killing of another person. I think in general, when the case of murder, it's a bit different because this person there's the capability of doing even more damage to society, right? So they say, for example, in terms of things like marriage, if somebody is known to be abusive and somebody else is saying, is this person reliable or not? This was one of the situations where the scholars will tell you, you're absolutely allowed to expose this person, or if they want to go into business with another person and you know that they're treacherous, that's another example they give, that you have every right to warn another person, this person is dangerous to go into business with. So there are a lot of basically exceptions. But when something is hidden and maybe it's better to just leave it like that, try to look for those situations in most cases, because sometimes we have a friend, a colleague, a relative, a cousin, a nephew, and who knows, maybe they have a substance abuse problem. And if they just bury it and make tawbah to Allah Azza wa Jal, and this isn't going to become a greater fitna, I'm saying like in these cases, in more general cases, it's better to conceal, have this person seek forgiveness, and to never do anything again. But if they're a threat to society as a whole, and there's the intent to continue doing this, then we're going to look at this in a different light, inshallah ta'ala. But good question. So now we get to the issue of protecting the honor of your brother or your sister in Islam. Based on even the question that was just asked, in some situations, the person is just too dangerous for the situation to be concealed. But that's why I'm saying in general, for example, especially for a lot of sins that if most people didn't hear about them, the person could just make tawbah and then continue living their life as a better person, and then their reputation would not have to be scarred for decades or even longer than that, right? Because the dignity and the reputation of a person in general is supposed to be preserved. Sometimes we can't help it, right? But if it's possible, you have to understand that that person might be living on earth for another 30, 40, 50 years. So when people start to spread gospel about others, you have the potential of ruining a person's life. They might even go and live in another city because of all the humiliation that's been done to them from people obviously doing gossip about them. So the Prophet ﷺ, he's giving us a huge incentive here for those who actually honor and guard the reputation of their brother or sister in Islam. When in the following hadith, that Abu Darda radiallahu anhu, that the Messenger of Allah he said, whoever protects the honor of his brother, Allah will protect his faith from the fire on the day of resurrection. This is a big honor to basically be told like you're not going to enter Jahannam. And it's very difficult, especially when you're in a gathering and everybody wants to backbite one person and you're the only person to say, hey, we shouldn't be doing this. It actually takes quite a bit of strength when everybody's like all wanting to do the same thing and you're the only person saying no. This could be a great honor for you on the day of judgment if you're the one who actually guards the honor of others in this dunya. And then as far as what backbiting is, I'm just going to kind of paraphrase here. The hadith is saying that backbiting is talking about your Muslim brother in a way which he dislikes. It was said to him, what if my Muslim brother says is as I say, meaning if it's actually true. If he is as you say, then it is backbiting. If it is not him, then it is slandering namima. And namima is worse. It's the combination of basically lying combined with backbiting or gossip or tale. So they say either slandering or tale-bearing. Slandering is maybe a slightly better translation. And the hadith is in Sahih Muslim. And for those who want to know exceptions, there is an article written by, or you could say a treatise, by Imam al-Nawawi. He was a very famous Shafi'i scholar, where he outlined 6 conditions when backbiting is permissible. So if anybody doesn't know the conditions of when it's allowed to backbite others, definitely read into those 6 conditions. One of them includes getting a fatwa. So let's say somebody in your household is abusive. You can go to a mufti. I'm not a mufti, by the way, but if you go to a mufti and you say so-and-so in my family is doing all these problems and it's becoming perpetual and we don't know how to stop it, you're allowed to go to a mufti or a very high scholar and ask him for a fatwa on how to solve this problem for you, even though you're exposing somebody in your family or household. So there are exceptions like this where you're trying to stop the problem, you can't fix it from within, so you're allowed to seek certain avenues to solve the problem, inshallah ta'ala. This next hadith is a very long hadith. It's a very beautiful hadith, to be honest. It's in Al-Hakim's Mustadrak. And the collection of Al-Hakim is the intention behind this book of hadith was to find every hadith that's not already found in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. These Sahih Bukhari and Muslim are not the only 2 books that are authentic in Islam, but they're extremely authentic. To the point, for example, in Sahih Bukhari, which is about 7,600 ahadith, that all of these ahadith, only 80 of them have a question mark on them because they call these hadith mu'allaq. But Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani from the Shafi'i madhab, he wrote a book basically showing how these 80 hadith that seem to have a missing person in the chain, that they actually through other asanid are all fully connected. So they're all fully muttasil, so therefore they're all actually fully sahih hadith. So these are very authentic books. But Al-Hakim, his job was to try to find books ahadith not already mentioned in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. Whenever you hear Bukhari and Muslim in general though, the general understanding is you're dealing with authentic hadith. So Imam Hakim wanted to find hadith that were not already in these 2 collections and to put them in his kitab called Al-Mustadrak. And so in this book he has the following hadith. The hadith is basically called hadith mu'allaq because one of the meanings of mu'allaq is something which is hanging, right? And so in this case, the hadith of the hanging papers is very promising for the people who are people of da'wah and people who want to have very high and strong iman in this life and in the next life, inshallah ta'ala. So Imam al-Hakim, he narrates that Umar ibn Khattab, who said that he was sitting with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he heard the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam say, do you know whom amongst the believers have the best iman? So Umar radiallahu anhu replied, the angels, O Messenger of Allah. The reply came, they are so, and they have the right to be so. For what stops them when Allah has given them such a status? But it is that He has given them. But it is other than them. So Umar radiallahu anhu said that then it is the prophets whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has honored with prophethood and the message. The reply came, they are so, and they have the right to be so. For what stops them when Allah has given them such a status that He has given them? But it is other than them. So then Umar asks, then who are they, O Messenger of Allah? Because it's someone other than the angels and it's someone other than the prophets that have the best iman in Islam. So whoever these people are, the Sahaba in general, they were go-getters. They were what you would call as-sabiqun al-awwalun. They were the people who strived, they were people who did sibaq. They raced towards amal as-salihat. And whenever they heard the Prophet ﷺ saying anything like, these are the best of people, these are khayrukum min nas, these are the best of basically all human beings, they would always want to know, the main thing is, how can I be like them? Who are they? So I can either be them or follow them. So that's why Umar is asking questions in this kind of context. So the answer came, they are aqwam, from the word qawm. They are groups of people that come after me in the loins of men, meaning they have not been born yet. So they believe in me even though they have never seen me. So this could technically apply to all of us. It's talking about people that are not from the time of the Prophet ﷺ. They're talking about people who come much later, after the Salaf as-Salih. And what else? And they find the hanging papers, so they work according to what is in it, and they have the best of they're the best of the believers in Iman. So what the mufassirun, the scholars of tafsir, those who explain a hadith, what they understand from this hadith is there will come a time where you will find most people do not care about actually implementing the Sharia of Allah Azza wa Jal. And this can very much apply to our times today. There are people who don't want to pray at all. They don't care about zakat, or they want to have a side business where it's not a fully halal type of business. They run like a variety store, and they have lottery tickets, and they have cigarettes, and they might even have alcohol in their stores, or even on other levels, like government levels, that there are Muslim countries that are opting into being part of a monarchy and serving their Western their puppet master rulers, rather than trying to implement a khilafah system and unify all the Muslims under one central system, so that you never have a problem like what happened in Palestine, or you never have a problem like what happened in Burma, or what happened in Egypt, or any of these other places. This has to do with the fact that Islam is not fully in its revived state right now. We're in a state of intellectual decline and political disunity. And when people, if they come in a time where they see a lot of the Sharia is not being implemented, and they see the hanging papers here represents the Quran and Sunnah, and they revive that as du'at, they call towards Islam the way it's supposed to be called to, these are the best people of Iman. So this is a very promising hadith for those who actually want to speak the haqq, those who actually want to do amr al-ma'ruf wa nahy al-munkar, command the good and forbid the evil. This is actually what Muslims should be doing in general, but those who do this in tough times, and when Islam is not obviously everywhere you look around, these are the best people of Iman. And so when I'm not saying for you to look down upon anybody, but if you know anybody and if you hang out with certain people at work and at school, and especially if they're Muslim, try to get them to become more active in social justice. Try to get them more active in calling people to the truth. And even if the government tells you, you're not really supposed to talk about religion at work and stuff like that, we're talking about salvation here, right? So the government can say whatever they want, but at the end of the day, on the day of judgment, they're not going to want to say any of that stuff anymore, because they're going to realize what life was all about, right? That Allah said, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. That Allah said, I only created mankind and the jinn for the one purpose, to worship me. That's our true purpose in life. Nobody really should be deprived of that. And if we have the key for that, we should try to offer that key to as many people as possible, inshallah ta'ala. So, the ayah that also talks about this concept of commanding the good and forbidding the evil, it comes from this ayah in Surah Ali Imran, which is chapter 3, verse ayah number 104, where Allah says, in Arabic it says, وَتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمَ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Which means in English, let there arise from you, a group from you amongst the Muslims, inviting all those to what is al-ma'ruf, what is good, and forbidding all that is munkar. وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمَ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. These are the best of people. They're the most successful of people. So obviously, when you hear the word muflihun, this is something you want to pay attention to. In Surah Al-Mu'minun, Allah says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Successful are the believers. And He starts listing all their characteristics. Well, even though this is in a different surah, it's still talking about the people of falah. When you're told to come to the prayer and you hear the adhan, you're hayya ala al-falah. Come to those, like basically, come to success, come to success. And we're told there's a hadith where if your salah is good on the day of judgment, everything else is going to be good. That doesn't mean that you can abandon everything else, but if you really connected with your prayers the way that you're supposed to connect, naturally everything else in your life should start connecting as well. Like, because it's like a matter of sincerity here, right? What you'll notice is the people who really are engaged in their prayer, it has an effect on everything else in their life. And in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah Azza wa Jal, He told us how the salah protects you against fahsha and munkar. So it protects you against immorality and it protects you against doing evil. So if we did our prayers properly and we really tried to connect with Allah Azza wa Jal, you would find in your heart that you don't want to do anything wrong. You'd find that Allah takes this out of you. And that's the beauty of the salah, but also the importance here is we want to look at as many ways possible of being successful, and one of those ways is doing da'wah. And also, interestingly, whenever something is really important in Islam and it really can get you to a high rank, neglecting it can also be like the complete opposite effect. And that's what's cleared up by the next evidence, which is from hadith. In Sunnah Tirmidhi, this is very interesting because when we talk about making dua for different countries, and I'm all for that. I'm all for making dua for any country that's oppressed, as much dua as you want. But if we look at the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, we're going to find that in addition to making dua, that the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba were people of action. So even when the Prophet ﷺ, when he would go into ghazawat, he would go into different battles, he would raise his hands for so long that Abu Bakr would basically go to the Prophet ﷺ and basically try to calm him down from all the continuous dua he was making. But then the Prophet ﷺ would also engage in battle. So it's not like he did one and then he kind of tried to avoid the other completely. The Sahaba were the same way. They tried to change the social environment around them and ask Allah Azza wa Jal to help them at the same time, and seek the nasr of Allah, and seek the victory and the help and the support of Allah Azza wa Jal. And this is basically what, if you look at all the right ayat and ahadith that have to do with da'wah, you're going to see this complete image. Like for example in this hadith in Sunnah Tirmidhi, where the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "By Allah, in whose hands is my soul, you will enjoin the good and forbid the evil, or else Allah will send upon you a punishment from Him and you will call upon Him and He will not answer you." So if you want your du'as to be accepted in general, do not be like the monks and the Christian monks and the Buddhist monks of the past who taught something called monasticism. Monasticism is like you want to go live up in the mountains, you want to isolate yourself from society, and you don't want to fix any of the problems. You're like, I see all this mess and chaos everywhere, why don't I go live somewhere peaceful and let the world rot? Because why should I care about it? Like subhanAllah, sometimes I talk to non-Muslims and they tell me how they want to invest their money. They want to live somewhere far away on a remote island or by a nice quiet river, far away from other people. And they just want to enjoy nature and they want to be by themselves and at peace, right? Because they don't want to think about what else is going on in the world. But Islam tells us that we should always be concerned with the affairs of other people, right? The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, ad-din al-mu'amala. This deen is how you interact with other people. And the Quran shuns the people of monasticism, the people who try to isolate themselves away from society. So our deen is when we see problems in the society around us, we try to do something about it. Yeah, there's obviously exceptions and nuances in terms of how to do it, but the intent is there. We want to eradicate munkar and we want to call to al-ma'ruf, whatever Islam calls to be good. And Islam tells you that change begins with you. It doesn't mean it ends with you, it starts with you. So as you develop yourself, you're going to become more influential and more helpful to other people so that you can start turning basically the society towards the right direction, inshallah ta'ala. And Allah said in Surah Al-Ra'd, He said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Which means that indeed Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is within themselves. So definitely start with you so that you can start becoming a tool of change for others, inshallah ta'ala. So now we're going to get to the references, inshallah ta'ala. So I said I want to focus mainly on 10 types of ulum ad-din, 10 types of Islamic sciences. Number one, first and foremost, is building a stronger connection with the Quran. A lot of times we come across a certain verse, and whether we're Arab or not, I'm not Arab, so I'm technically Ajami. My background is Yunani wa Bolanda, Greek and Polish. So it's not my first language. One of the things that I try to do to connect with the Quran more, and it's something you can also show to non-Muslims when you're trying to invite them to Islam, is show them the word-for-word meaning of the Quran. Because if you just go through the Quran even one time, and you go through you see the English underneath each individual word, you're going to boost your vocabulary in Arabic tremendously. Like you're probably going to learn around 10,000 words in the Arabic language, and you're going to learn them in the original Fusha Arabiya, like the original classical Arabic. And that's really going to help you both in Quran and Hadith studies. If you do this one time, probably when you read Hadith even, you're probably going to already understand half of what you're already reading. Then combine that with just taking some Arabic lessons. Maybe you listen to some conversational tapes on like Al-Arabiyyatu Bayna Yadayk, some conversational types of hiwar, discussions. You're going to quickly start to pick up most of the language. At least understanding. Communication's a bit harder because of the qawaid, the grammar, but at least you can start to understand what you're reading. You can understand the Quran, you can understand the Sunnah. So I definitely start there. Also, if you already are Arab or you already understand the language pretty well, we all know there's a lot of nuances in the language. And sometimes some ayat, it's a lot different than the Amiyya, than the dialect that people speak today, right? So that's why it's important to have access to tafsir. The nice thing about Quran.com today is that if I was going to use a website for Quran, the main one, Quran.com, is now way better than it was 10 years ago. Because now you have access to 3 different tafsir in English, and some of them are also available in a lot of other languages. So for example, Tafsir Ibn Kathir is one of them. It's available now in over 20 different languages. If you go to Quran.com, you look up any ayah in the Quran. Doesn't matter where the order is, you click on it, you go to the little book Tafsir button, it will give you these 3 different tafsir available to you right away. You don't have to open up the 8 volumes of actual Tafsir Ibn Kathir. You go to a specific ayah, it'll open up the tafsir for you just like that. You can even copy and paste it into social media or into your notes. It's very user-friendly, if that's the right word to use. And then the best app that I found for doing this on your phone is one called Green Tech Quran. It has a similar feature. You get the word-for-word Quran thing. Both of them have the audio effect where you can listen to the individual ayats from like at least 20 different Qur'an, I think. There's going to be a little bit difference in the numbers of Qur'an for both of them, but it's a good number. Maybe Quran.com actually a little bit less, maybe more like 15. But I think for the Green Tech app, I would say it's probably more like 40 or 50 Qur'an, so Qur'an reciters. So a lot of different options. Plus you have the color-coded tajweed inside of it. Plus you have all the tajweed rules summarized on a small little page this long. Like there's people that spend like maybe a month or 2 months learning tajweed. I remember I went to the little tajweed help option inside of the settings menu, and it was literally this long, and it just gave you an audio example of all the tajweed rules. It's the easiest way to memorize it. They just showed you some short surahs, an audio example of each tajweed rule in practice, then put it in tajweed mode, and with barely any preparation, you can start reading with pretty good tajweed right from the get-go. This is an amazing resource both for you and for new Muslims. So having Quran and Tafsir, having these 2 tools is definitely going to help you out a lot, inshallah ta'ala. Sunnah.com for English speakers is going to be super useful because it gives you the Anglizi wa Arabiya side by side for any hadith that you can possibly think of from 16 of the major collections. So it's not every book of hadith, but you have a lot. You have Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Abu Dawud, Nasa'i, Ibn Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah. You have, for example, Musnad Ahmad ibn Hanbal. You have Imam Malik's Muwatta. You have Al-Bulugh al-Maram by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. You have Arba'in al-Nawawi. You have Ash-Shama'al from Imam Tirmidhi. You have 16 different books of hadith in English and Arabic with keyword search. So you can type in just a few words in English or in Arabic for any of these books of hadith, and it will search all of them for the ahadith that you're looking for. And then you can also copy and share this on social media or copy and paste it into a document for a khutbah or for a tadhkirah, for an Islamic reminder. It's very user-friendly as well. For those who are much better in Arabic, maybe you're better off going with, what do you call it, Al-Maktaba Al-Shama'il, or Al-Shamila, sorry, Al-Shamila. This is like the major Islamic library resource online that for those who speak the Arabic language, pretty much every book that's ever been written in Islamic literature in the original Arabic language, you can download for free on this website. I was listening to a scholar from the UK, and he wanted to look up a difference of opinion on the issue of boxing. Now, of course, it's much safer just to avoid this issue because of all the hadith that warn about hitting in the face. Even, subhanAllah, if a person is considered guilty of committing zina, that when the punishment of a rajam is applied, they avoid hitting the face. That's why some scholars, they said, look, even when somebody's given the death penalty, they avoid hitting the face. On top of the fact that there's so many hadith that say don't hit the face, don't even hit the face of an animal, right? But this one scholar from the UK, he went and he used this Al-Maktaba Al-Shamila. He went to this website and he wanted to look up differences of opinion on the issue of punching another person in the face. He found 200 explanations in less than a minute. 200, and then many of them had differences of opinion, or at least differences of opinion between a Muslim hitting a non-Muslim and this and that. So the point is that this is a very rich resource, especially if you know Arabic. So just something to consider or aspire to or even use if you're already able to do that. Usul al-Fiqh, I know Sheikh Adnan, he's taught this course at least 2 times, if not 3 times already. 1 time at London Muslim Mosque, and at least 1 time here at the Muslim Wellness Center. Hopefully that doesn't pick up on the mic too much with the baby in the background. I'm not saying you have to get rid of your baby, just it's okay. But anyways, cute kid. So, Usul al-Fiqh, this is important because it helps us to understand how the mujtahideen, the scholars of ijtihad, how they derive rulings. So people who like Islamic law or want to understand how it works, how they actually do istinbat fil hukm shar'i, how they actually pull out the rulings from the Quran and Sunnah, what are the steps, what are the protocols that they have to take, that's what Usul al-Fiqh teaches you. It teaches you how a mujtahid, how an alim is actually able to derive fatwa, derive Islamic rulings, so that you understand and appreciate the system, how it works. So this is very important to understand, and also it helps you to avoid a lot of, I want to say, immature debates, because it's not wrong to question why there's a difference of opinion between different scholars on is this considered to be halal, haram to wear a certain type of clothing or to eat a certain type of food. It's good to ask questions, but sometimes the way that people approach it is technically not in the correct way, and it could even be sinful. But if you have a background in Usul al-Fiqh, you'll understand the tools, the means, the protocols, the steps that should be taken to try to ask these questions with the right type of adab, so it's never considered a sin on you. It's only going to be, if anything, hasanats for you if you approach it the right way. Usul al-Hadith, because a lot of times people will say, bro man, is that hadith even sahih? First of all, we need to find out what is a sahih hadith even to begin with, right? So when you study usul hadith, you'll find out that a sahih hadith is a hadith that's muttasil, it's fully connected, it has adala, everybody in the hadith chain, they're all considered to be reliable people, they're all considered to be thiqa, that's another word that they use, that these people have dhabat, that their memory is perfect actually for every person in the sanad or in all of the asanid that are being basically diagnosed here, and that when you have all these things and you have no illat khafiyya, no hidden defects, if you have all of this, and some scholars even added more conditions, like Imam Bukhari said, he tried to prove liqa, that there was actually association, and that the people actually would have met between each section of the chain. So when you meet all these criterion, then you can say a hadith is sahih. When you know this, it gives you a much more appreciation for it. Not to mention knowing the major books, which ones are more authentic than others, who are the major scholars of hadith, so you know who to check and who to basically, see the evaluation of the tahqiq of, to see, is this hadith in fact sahih? So rather than just grabbing something off the internet, especially if it's only in English, and there's no commentary explanation of the authenticity of this hadith, this is a bit dangerous, right? People can actually end up misquoting, aside from misquoting hadith, just falsely representing hadith, claiming some are da'if when they're sahih, claiming some are sahih when they're da'if. When you understand usul hadith, you're going to avoid a lot of these major mistakes, right? So this is definitely going to help you out. Then the issue of fiqh, right? This is important because in general as Muslims, we need to know at least one madhab or at least one way from one mujtahid on how to do any act of worship that we would be engaged in, right? So that our acts of worship are valid. Aside from that, it's not wajib, it's not fard, it's not obligatory for you to know the opinions of the other madhahib, but this will serve you and your da'wah if you choose to learn about the other opinions. Why will that be the case? Is because non-Muslims will come up to you and they'll ask you about all these controversial topics, right? So they say, man, why are Muslims so scared of dogs? Like every time everybody sees a dog, it's like they want to climb up the elevator, or they go running down the park in the other direction. I'm not saying you have to follow the Maliki opinion, but I'm saying is that when you know about the differences of opinion, not only will you appreciate it more, you'll be able to help maybe settle some concerns that a lot of non-Muslims have, right? So for example, when a lot of non-Muslims, they ask me about the issue of the dog, when you go into, for example, into the Maliki school and you look into like their evidences, subhanAllah, it's a lot more than people would think. When they look at the hadith that says to wash whatever a dog has licked, a vessel, to wash it 1 time with dirt and 6 times with water. For example, Imam Malik, he made the argument that basically if this was considered to be najasa, you would have expected that you only have to wash something once. The fact that you have to use the same material more than 1 time, it shows that this is ta'abbud, like this is an act of worship. We have a lot of things that we do multiple times that has nothing to do with tahara. When you wrap somebody in a kafan, you wrap them how many times? 3 or 5 or 7 times. This has to do with cleanliness. When you make wudu, you can wash most of the limbs 1 time, 2 times, or 3 times. Is this because you're dirty, or is this because it is an act of ta'abbud? In addition to that, Ibn Rushd al-Maliki, he mentions in his book Al-Bidayat al-Mujtahid, the beginning of becoming a scholar, he writes in his section, the section on dogs, he mentions his grandfather who was a qadi, and his judgment, his qada, his fatwa on this ruling. And he explains that in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was very common for many dogs to have what you would call today rabies. It's a viral infection that's lethal and it would kill you. And what's interesting is that what we know today is that if you actually mix dirt with water, you can actually remove rabies, the virus, from a petri dish. We didn't know that 1400 years ago, but now we know without using advanced chemicals, by just mixing dirt with water, you can kill a potentially very lethal virus. Because if anybody actually gets rabies, if you don't get hospital care like almost immediately, you're pretty much bound to die. And that's the thing also with dogs and other creatures. They have it for a little while, and then it gets to the point where it's just too viral in their body. And then after they kill a few people by biting into them, then those animals end up dying. And there's a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ that he actually licensed the killing of dogs. If you read further a hadith about this, that after about a year or 2, this hadith was abrogated. So that means that this was a temporary ruling. That means there must have been an outbreak of rabies or some other viral contamination of dogs. And another hadith basically says this was put to an end. So then the question is, why was it put to an end? Could it be because there was something going on during that time? Then you read other ahadith that say that dogs used to go into the masjid and the Sahaba would do nothing about it. So if the dog was such a concern, do you think, imagine today, if a dog came right now into the masjid, what would people do? They would freak out, right? They would try to probably shoot the dog or wrap a rope around it and throw it out. But if the Sahaba didn't do that, and this was the place that they would pray in, and when you pray, you have to pray in full tahara. You need to be physically pure, and you have to have wudu, and your clothes have to be tahir, and the ground underneath you has to be tahir. If all this has to be tahir, and the dog is najis, and the dog is walking wherever he wants and licking whoever he wants, does it make sense? So that means that it must have been another reason. So Ibn Rushd makes the argument that it was actually not an issue of najasa, it's an issue of illness. That some dogs, they're infected. So if you know that a dog is infected, that's what the hadith is talking about, with the hadith about if you see a dog lick a vessel. Notice the hadith didn't say if a dog licks clothes, if a dog licks your skin. There's no hadith that says that. That's why not only the Malikiyah, but also the Zahiriyah, another madhab that's not so popular today, they both said we don't see any explicit evidence for the actual saliva being najis. Again, do you have to follow this opinion? Absolutely not, because there's 3 other madhahib who say otherwise. But when you're dealing with non-Muslims, and if you're even just dealing with Muslims in general, and you see Muslims arguing and fighting and yelling at each other, there are some issues where you just got to lay out the evidences so that people can calm down and respect each other, right? Because most of the time, people are just interested in defeating the other person rather than listening to what is fair when we look at different angles on the topic, inshallah. Yeah. I don't know, but the fact that it was only a temporary allowance of killing, that's kind of the thing that kind of just stands out to me, right? There's also hadith that says that to kill the voracious dog. So now it's specifying the type of dog that should be killed, a voracious, vicious dog. And what's known about dogs that have rabies is they become very aggressive. They're not like the average dog that's just doing its own thing, right? So they're extremely aggressive. And so it seems to be that these were the dogs that were targeted. And Allahu A'lam, like I'm not saying it's foolproof that it could be for this reason or that, but if the issue was just saliva in general, then when it comes to a place of prayer where tahara is a must, right, then you would think that it would have been explicitly mentioned that the saliva is najis, especially in the place of prayer or the masjid, because we're talking about essentially, this would have been most like this hadith, if I remember correctly, it would have been Madani, right? Most of the ahkam sharia anyways happened in the Medinan period. And when the Prophet, when he built his first masjid, it wasn't in Mecca, it was in Medina, right? So for them to just go in and out casually, whether there was rabies or not, if that was the reason or not, the fact that the dogs were coming into the masjid and the Sahaba were not doing anything to prevent it. There's no mention that they cleaned up after them or that they prevented them from coming in. That's a big evidence for the Malikiyyah. They also mention that in Surah Al-Ma'idah that Allah gives the permission for you to use dogs as hunting animals to basically catch your next meal for you. And there's no mention of a special way how to clean this animal. Those of the opposite view will say, well, it's negligible because it might have just kind of bit into the edge of the flesh. Well, the canine teeth are pretty big. They can probably get straight into the meat. If it was so najis for a person to eat whatever a dog catches for you, then there would have been something mentioned because we can't eat any najasa. So most likely some najasa would have got caught in the meat. The fact that you don't have to wash the meat 7 times with, 1 time with dirt, 6 times with water. And no scholar, by the way, says that, by the way. None of them say that if a hunting dog catches your food, that you do the same thing like you would do to a dish. And what we know with a dish is that things get licked, or if people share dishes, people share cups, right? So this is now the danger of putting something in your mouth. And when it comes to viruses, what's well known even from COVID, they were telling people, avoid anything getting in your mouth, your eyes, or your nose, or your ears, sorry. So any of the openings, and even just in general, you go to a doctor, you ask about a bacterial infection or a viral infection, and somebody's like, you know what, my eye has been really bothering me, right? The doctor will probably ask you, were you rubbing your eye? Did you touch a doorknob and then touch your eye or anything like that? These are the openings to essentially disease getting into your body, for most cases, because there's openings here. That's how stuff gets inside of you. So when it comes to drinking from something or eating from a plate, this is the vessel for stuff getting inside you, right? So anyways, there's difference of opinion. I'm not going to deny that. So the last set of usul al-din that I want to look at, or ulum al-din, is usul al-aqidah or usul al-i'tiqad. This is the science of Islamic belief. And I'm a big proponent of not going too deep into aqidah to the point that people are starting to debate things like, does Allah have a real hand? Is it a metaphorical hand? It's better to just believe and to not ask any more questions. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he said, if a person tries to visualize Allah Azza wa Jal, this is shirk. You don't have the tools in this dunya to be able to see what Allah looks like. He will reveal himself one day. You should be humble and appreciative enough to know that one day you'll see him, and alhamdulillah for that. So just focus on doing amal as-salihat, good deeds, and believe in whatever Allah tells you. Have full tasdeeq, have full belief in Allah Azza wa Jal and what He has revealed, and inshallah you'll be just fine. I mentioned some things in here though, because you have to have a foundation within Aqidah in general. And what I liked is there was a book called The Creed of the Four Imams. In this book it lists, because there are certain scholars that are unanimously accepted as like, I'm hesitant to use street slang, so I'm going to avoid using it in the masjid. But basically they're the top guys, okay? They're up there.
And so nobody really debates people like Imam Malik, Imam Shafi, Ahmed bin Hanbal, Imam Abu Hanifa. Everybody pretty much universally says these people are some of the most amazing scholars that ever lived on the face of the earth. Most people in the madhab will say nobody could ever surpass them, from like over 1,000 years of people studying within each of these founding madhab. So these four imams, they spoke about Allah Azza wa Jal. They spoke about His attributes. They spoke about the Day of Judgment, the malaika, and a lot of issues that have to do with aqeedah. It might be worth reading their aqwal to see how they approach these issues. You're going to find in a lot of cases, and you'll find later scholars like Abdul Bar al-Maliki arguing, basically, believe in what Allah says, don't ask how. It's as simple as that. If you go down that route, you're going to find a lot of people on social media debating these things, and if you've seen it for long enough, you're running a bigger risk in getting itham, getting sin from Allah Azza wa Jal, than getting closer to Him. Why would I say that? Because in the Quran, in multiple places in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal says, and who is worse than the one who invents a lie about Allah? When you say Allah is this or Allah is that, if you're wrong, you're taking that gamble. And there's no ayah or hadith that says to go into this stuff. You have to believe for sure, no doubt. But to actually dig into it and say, I think Allah is, and you start to specifically describe Him in a way where you're doing more than what basically Allah has asked you for, to me it's a risky business. I wouldn't advise it, and I would say look into the aqliyah, look into the mindset of the Sahaba. If they were more focused on doing good deeds than debating theology, then maybe that's what we should be doing. Because they were considered the best of people. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, the best of you are the people of my generation. And then the next group after them, and the next group after them. He stopped after those 3 generations. He didn't go any further than that. We see most of the debating happens after this time. You find that in the time of the Sahaba, the amount of things that they actually debated on in Aqeedah are very few. You'd be lucky if you can count them on one hand. So then we have the issue of, and then there's also a nice book called The Eternal Challenge. This is not really considered an Aqeedah book in the way that, like for example, if you were to read like Imam al-Tahawi's book, right, At-Tahawiyya. That's like a more classical book of Aqeedah. But why would I include a book like The Eternal Challenge? This has more to do with like proving that the Quran is perfectly preserved, showing the scientific miracles of the Quran, showing things that basically show how much knowledge Allah Azza wa Jal has over the universe, and showing people with empirical evidence that look, see how Allah is telling us how He created the universe, and that we can actually check all these different signs and prove that the Quran is true. So this is Aqeedah based, it's based on Islamic beliefs, but it's more the modern approach, which I personally, I would advocate for. But I would also just put in a little nuance here, which is going to come up later in the course anyways, is that if you're going to use science and Islam in the same sentence, make sure that you're talking about things that are already agreed upon in science and that have been agreed upon for a very long time. So basically like scientific laws or absolute scientific facts. If you go into things like theories and stuff like that, science changes its mind about theories like every 10, 100 years. That could backfire on you and that could backfire on somebody else, and they might be shaky in their faith and it could cause a lot of problems. But we'll talk about that more in detail as we get more into Islam and science, inshallah. Tazkiyah, and I know that I'm keeping an eye on the clock here. We still have 8 minutes, inshallah, if I want to stay within the 1 hour window. So Tazkiyah has to do with spiritual purification. And قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. Allah told us in Surah Al-Shams that the person who is successful is the one who purifies themselves, right? And so Tazkiyah, there are many different books and many different scholars that you can read from. But some of the 3 biggest names that you'll probably hear when it comes to Tazkiyah would be Imam al-Nawawi, Imam Ghazali, and Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. I know I have Ibn Taymiyyah in there as well, but the other 3 names, actually you can even argue Ibn Rajab should be in there as well. These are some of the big names in terms of spiritual purification. If a person spends years, let's say doing what I'm doing right here, right? Like I'm standing here, I'm giving you guys a dars in the masjid. If I'm doing this for the wrong reason, right? If I'm doing this for fame, if I want people to think that I'm like super smart or knowledgeable, if that's my intention, unfortunately, astaghfirullah, Allah protect me, I'd be one of the worst people on the Day of Judgment. Because there's a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ where he says that, he talks about there are 3 people that will enter Jahannam first. And the 3 people that he's going to mention, they're all Muslim. The 3 people he mentioned was the alim. When the alim comes forth, the alim, the scholar, he'll say, oh Allah, I learned all this knowledge for your sake and I taught it for your sake. Allah will say, kadhabt, you lied, you only did this so that people would think you're knowledgeable, and this person will be thrown into the hellfire. A second person will come. He'll be a mujahid, a fighter, a warrior in battle, a person who fought. He'll say, I fought for your sake, fi sabilillah, right? Allah will say to this person, kadhabt, you lied. You only did this so that people would call you brave or famous, right? So again, seeking the pleasure or the approval, really, of other people for an act of worship that should have been for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. And then a third person will come, mutasaddiq, a person who gives a lot of sadaqah, a lot of charity. He will say, oh Allah, I donated all this money for your cause. Allah will say, kadhabt, you lied, you only gave this money away so that people would call you generous. Like we see sometimes on TV sometimes, you see a really famous celebrity or like some rich guy with billions of dollars, he's standing there next to the big check for $1 million, making sure all the cameras can see him. This is riyah, right? When you're showing off acts of worship. So on the surface, great guy, what it looks like, right? But if he did this all just to please the people, those deeds are wasted. Right? This doesn't mean, by the way, in general, that you don't want good for others. So when we say in Islam, bir al-walidain is important, being good to your parents is important, it's good. And you can want good for your parents, and you can want to please your parents, but you seek your reward from Allah Azza wa Jal. I like to teach the young kids this, especially when it comes to Quran. Most young kids that I know that read Quran, they're only doing it because their parents told them to, or they're worried they're going to take their video games away or their iPad or something, right? But actually try to do it for Allah's sake. Right? And one scholar, Sheikh Ala al-Sayyid, he used to be like, I think one of the, was he like the lead imam in ISNA, and I think he's still kind of involved with ISNA anyways. He was saying that riyah is like, if you're reading Quran and somebody walks in the room, nothing changes. You don't read more because somebody walked in the room, and you don't read less either. You don't close the Quran either, nor do you read more. Like you're completely unaffected by the fact that other people are around you. Like this is when you know your ibadah is getting pretty sincere, inshallah ta'ala. When it comes to Arabi, again, I'm not claiming to be an expert here, but there's a lot of different resources online, and there's a lot of different dictionaries. What I like about almaani.com is it's going to give you maybe 16 different ways to understand a word. It's going to give you like the legal terminology, it's going to give you the medical terminology, it's going to give you the classical Arabi, it's going to give you the modern day slang use of different types of words. And al-ma'ani means like the meaning, right? You can type in English or in Arabic or in other languages, and it will tell you the meanings of words detailed, like one word, and the meaning is like this long. So definitely a step up from Tarjum Google or Google Translate, but I still use Google Translate. I like Google Translate because it tries to focus on the most prominent, most commonly used meaning, and it's also kind of co-edited. So other people who speak Arabic, when they see there's a mistake on Google Translate, they actually make edits to Google Translate to improve the translation. So just as something very quick, Google Translate can be nice when you just want a really fast meaning for what's most commonly the usage of the word. But for something deep and nuanced, I would recommend almaani.com. For conversational Arabic, I mentioned already Al-Arabiyya Bayna Yadayk. It's a nice conversational series. I think originally it was developed in Egypt, and the whole purpose was actually for Ajmayun, like basically non-Arabs, to learn conversational Arabic. That's the whole purpose of the book series. So it's kind of like Medina, the Medina book series in Saudi, but I find like they don't focus a lot on hiwar, on discussions as much as Al-Arabiyya Bayna Yadayk. So if I were you, I would focus on this one first. And I noticed now online, mashallah, there's this one brother, I think his name is Brother Muqbil. I was listening to the series online, and he did a really good job of going through the text and recording it and explaining it with like crystal clear Arabic. Sometimes some people don't pronounce Arabic properly. This guy did a phenomenal job, gave a really good explanation. He recorded all of his lessons of him giving darus with a bunch of students, and it's available on YouTube. So if you're not a person who likes to even sit down and read from the book or want to listen to the CD, audio or whatever, like I would listen to this when I was driving in my car, right? And then like the guy's just explaining everything, and he's going through the book and scrolling through the PDFs, and it's just nice. Sometimes we can learn a lot just driving in our cars. Like it's good obviously to read directly from the book and learn directly from the mashaykh, but on some things, it's good to listen to cassettes, right? As long as whoever you're listening to is qualified, you'd be surprised how much you can learn when you're just doing other things. You could be doing the dishes, you could be doing your homework, you could be marking some tests for some students and listening to some lectures from some good high quality mashaykh or shayukh, and you would learn tons, especially if you do this for like 10 years. Seerah and Tariq al-Islamiyya, so like Seerah, the biography of the Prophet ﷺ, in general Islamic history, everybody should read at least one Seerah book. When the Moon Split is a simpler version of Ar-Rahiq al-Maktoum, the sealed nectar. Most people, they tell you, Ar-Rahiq al-Maktoum is a good book, the sealed nectar. It is, it's a very good book, but it's very detailed. It's quite thick, and sometimes there's so much detail that sometimes it's hard to focus on the story itself as it comes through. So the same author, Saif ar-Rahman Mubarak Puri, wrote a simpler book, which is called When the Moon Split, and in the newer version, it has comprehension questions built into it. So when I was teaching at the weekend school at the Islamic Center, I used this book because it has color, some simple illustrations, but the main thing is basically like chapter questions, so they can actually test themselves as they're reading through the seerah, and obviously it's a little bit more simpler language, right? So for those reasons, I would recommend it, but there are a lot of different seerah books out now, so it's worth looking at least one good seerah book and making sure you go from cover to cover. That way you know the story of the Prophet ﷺ and see how it connects with the ayat and ahadith. So lastly, we get to dawah. And I know I'm basically out of time right now, so I'll just summarize this in 30 seconds. So when it comes to books on dawah, there are going to be a bunch that I'm going to mention in the PowerPoint, but a lot of it's going to come down to the fact that just find a lot of good modern day du'at that are really good at debating online or who've published modern day works, because they're living in our times, so they know the kind of questions that get brought up. I actually have a whole bunch of slides that were supposed to come up where I start to mention the names of some specific personalities, but it looks like I'm going to have to save those personalities for next time. But look at the modern day du'at and see what we can learn from them, because a lot of them are dealing with the questions that we would also face in the da'wah, inshallah ta'ala, but we'll save that for the next session. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.